My name is Sarah Whitfield. I am 35 years old. And on a Thursday evening in September, I sat in the fourth row of the Riverside Ballroom in Nashville, Tennessee, in a room of 300 people and listened to my mother stand at a podium under a gold spotlight and deliver a 4-minute tribute to my sister Jenna. 4 minutes, the kind of 4 minutes that has been rehearsed, that has had things added to it over the years. The way a house gets additions, a detail here, an accomplishment there, nothing too big, just enough to keep the structure growing in one direction. When she finished, the room applauded. My mother pressed both hands to her chest and looked at Jenna with the expression she reserves for things she considers her greatest achievements. Then she looked out at the audience. Her eyes found me in the fourth row. She smiled the efficient smile. She said into the microphone, "And this is our other daughter, Sarah. She does accounting." She lifted one hand briefly in my direction, the kind of wave you give to someone you are acknowledging without introducing, and then she stepped back from the podium. The room had already begun to move on, glasses being refilled, chairs shifting, the low sound of 300 people deciding the next thing. I sat with my hands in my lap. I did not move. I did not look away from the podium. In the third row, directly in my sight line, a man in a dark suit turned in his seat and looked at me. His name was Webb. He was the managing partner of Webb, Harris & Cole, one of the 3 largest forensic accounting firms in the southeastern United States. He had been my boss for 7 years. He held my gaze for a moment. Then he turned back to face the front. He reached for his water glass. He set it down. He stood up. But before I go any further, welcome to Velvet Revenge Stories. This is where ordinary women meet impossible families and find their footing through patience, principle, and one well-timed truth. If someone has ever brought you into a room, yet left your true essence standing at the door, this one is for you. Drop a comment, hit the subscribe button, and stay with me, because what Webb said when he stood up is the reason I am telling this story. I need to back up all the way to a kitchen in Brentwood, Tennessee, where a girl named Sarah used to sit at the counter, doing homework, while her mother stood at the stove and talked to her younger sister, Jenna, about everything. Jenna, 2 years younger than me. She arrived into this family the way certain children arrive, already anticipated, already prepared for, already settled into the space before she had done a single thing to earn it. My mother, Patricia, has a way of organizing the world into the things she loves and the things she manages. I have understood since I was 9 which category I was in. My father, Derek, worked in real estate development for 28 years. He is a man of strong opinions and selective attention. The opinions are for everyone. The attention is mostly for Jenna. I was the capable one, the quiet one, the one who did not require management because she managed herself. This was never said out loud. It was simply arranged. The way furniture is arranged, nobody discusses it. It is simply where things end up after enough small adjustments over enough years. Jenna is 33 years old. She is beautiful, the way my mother always wanted to be. She married Brett Cole at 26, in a ceremony my parents funded entirely, $135,000. I know this because I was the one who organized the vendor payments. Not because I was asked, but because by the time the wedding arrived, the original coordinator had quit, the florist had a billing dispute nobody else knew how to resolve, and my mother called me on a Tuesday morning in March with that particular tightness in her voice. That means the situation has arrived at Sarah. I fixed it. I fixed all of it in 11 days from Nashville, while managing 3 active client accounts and a quarterly report that was due the following Friday. Nobody said thank you with specificity. My mother said, "You're a total lifesaver, Sarah. We couldn't do this without you." She said it the way people say things that are meant to function as both gratitude and guarantee. I noted it. I said, "I'm glad it worked out." And I went back to my quarterly report. Let me tell you what I do. I am a senior forensic accountant at Webb, Harris & Cole. I have been there for 7 years. I specialize in financial fraud investigation, estate dispute accounting, and nonprofit financial compliance. I find things. That is the most honest description. I find things that people have moved, hidden, mislabeled, or restructured in ways designed to look legitimate from a distance. Up close, the numbers always tell a different story. Numbers do not lie. People lie using numbers. There is a difference. And I know exactly how to read it. My family knows I am an accountant. My mother introduces me as such at gatherings, a single sentence, sometimes with the word just in front of it, the way you say just about things you are quietly apologizing for. She has never asked what forensic accounting is. She has never asked about a case. She has never asked about the firm. In 7 years, I noted this the same way I note everything, quietly in the back of my mind, in the part that keeps records without being asked to. Jenna founded a nonprofit 3 years ago, the Ella Cole Foundation, named for Brett's grandmother. It raises money for pediatric art programs in underserved schools. The mission is genuine, the events are beautiful, and the branding is impeccable. My mother became the unofficial public face of the foundation within 6 months of its founding. She attended every gala. She spoke at every luncheon. She introduced Jenna at every event with a 4-minute tribute that grew one detail longer every year. The foundation raised $412,000 in its second year. In its third year, it raised $608,000. I know these numbers because they are public record. Nonprofit financials are required to be filed annually with the IRS, Form 990, available to anyone who knows to look. I looked, not because I was suspicious, because looking at numbers is what I do, the way other people breathe. What I found on a Tuesday evening in July, sitting at my kitchen counter with a glass of water and my laptop open, changed the shape of everything that came after. Let me tell you about my grandmother, Eleanor, before I tell you what I found. Eleanor Whitfield. She died 4 years ago, at 81 years old. She was the person who gave me the yellow spiral notebook when I was 12 years old. She pressed it into my hands on a Sunday afternoon in her kitchen in Franklin and said, "Write down everything that matters. Not feelings. Facts. Facts have a way of becoming the most important thing in the room at the exact moment you need them most." I have kept a yellow spiral notebook since I was 12 years old. Not the same one, the same color, the same rule. Facts only. Everything that matters. In that notebook, beginning in January of this year, I had been writing down a different set of facts. Facts about my savings account. I had noticed the previous October a withdrawal I did not recognize for $100. I checked my statements and found another. March of the previous year, $800. I went back further. Over 18 months, there were 9 withdrawals. The total was $7,200. None of them were authorized by me. My parents had been added to my savings account when I was 19 years old and had my wisdom teeth removed. My mother had driven me to the surgery, and I had given her temporary access to cover the copay. I had never removed her. I had simply not thought about it, because it was my mother. I sat at my kitchen counter for a very long time, looking at those 9 entries. I did not call her that night. I did not call her the following morning. I opened the yellow spiral notebook, and I wrote down every entry. Date, amount, running total. I took screenshots, I printed them, and I put them in a folder I labeled with my grandmother's name, Eleanor. Because she was the one who taught me that facts have a way of becoming the most important thing in the room. I was going to need them. I just did not know exactly which room yet. The Form 990 for the Ella Cole Foundation took me 45 minutes to review. I am a forensic accountant. I can move through a nonprofit filing the way other people move through a familiar neighborhood, knowing where things should be, noticing immediately when something is not where it belongs. The program service expenses were correctly reported. The fundraising expenses were reasonable. The administrative expenses were higher than the industry standard for an organization this size, not flagrantly, just slightly above the line where it begins to warrant attention. Compensation for one contractor appeared in 2 separate line items under different reporting categories. Not illegal on its face, but unusual, the kind of thing that looks like a paperwork error from a distance and looks like something else up close. I cross-referenced the contractor against the Tennessee Secretary of State's Business Registration Database. The contractor was a sole proprietorship, registered to a Patricia and Whitfield, my mother. I sat with that for a long time. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the window, the last of the evening light was going orange over the roofline. I closed my laptop. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat at the counter and looked at the window and thought about my grandmother Eleanor pressing a yellow spiral notebook into my 12-year-old hands. Write down everything that matters. Facts. I opened the notebook. I wrote. I did not call anyone that night. I did not call anyone the following morning. I went to work. I sat at my desk. I looked at the harbor the way I look at all complex things, from a distance first to see the shape of it, and then closer, line by line, until I understood every detail of the structure and exactly where it was not going to hold. By the end of that week, I had a very clear picture. I placed the yellow spiral notebook in my desk drawer. I locked it, and I waited for the invitation. The invitation came 6 weeks later. White cardstock. Gold embossing. The Ella Cole Foundation's annual autumn gala. Cordially inviting Ms. Sarah Whitfield. My mother had handwritten a note at the bottom. In her careful cursive. It said, "Please come, Sarah. It would mean a lot to have you there." I turned the card over in my hands once. I set it on my kitchen counter. I called Marcus Webb. He picked up on the second ring. I said, "Marcus, are you free on the 14th? He said, "What do you need?" I said, "I need you at a gala." A short pause. Then he said, "I'll be there. I want to tell you about Lily before I tell you about the gala. Lily is my niece. She is 8 years old. She is Jenna's coloring and none of Jenna's performance. She is the stillest child I have ever known, the kind of still that comes not from quietness, but from paying attention so completely that movement would interrupt it. She reminds me of myself at that age, sitting at the counter, watching and writing things down." 3 weeks before the gala, Lily appeared at my apartment door with Jenna on a Saturday morning. Jenna had errands. She asked if Lily could stay for 2 hours. I agreed. Jenna drove away with her coffee and her phone before I had fully opened the door. Lily came in. She looked around my apartment with those careful eyes. She said, "You have a lot of notebooks." I said, "I do." She said, "What do you write in them?" I said, "Things that matter." She thought about that for a moment. She nodded once, the way children nod when something confirms what they already suspected. We made pancakes. We sat at the counter. She told me about a project at school, a drawing she was doing of the people in her family, and what she knew about each of them. She said she was stuck on mine. She said, "I know what Grandma does and what Mom does and what Grandpa does, but I don't know what you do." I looked at her. I said, "I find things that are hiding in numbers." She considered this seriously. She said, "Like a detective." I said, "Exactly like a detective." Something lit in her eyes. She said, "I'm going to draw you differently then." On the morning of the gala, a card arrived under my apartment door, a folded piece of paper from a yellow legal pad. Inside was a drawing in blue crayon, a woman at a desk, papers spread in front of her, and a magnifying glass in her hand. And at the bottom, in the careful printing of a child who has been taught to take her time, it said, "My favorite aunt, the one who always comes, even when nobody asks her to." I stood in my hallway, holding that piece of paper for a long time. Then I folded it carefully. I put it in the yellow spiral notebook, next to the facts. I got dressed. I drove to the Riverside Ballroom. I arrived early. I always arrive early. The Riverside Ballroom was everything the Ella Cole Foundation knew how to do well. Warm lighting, round tables with cream linens, centerpieces that looked effortless and cost $120 each, a silent auction along the east wall, a bar with 2 attendants who moved with the particular efficiency of people who have done this many times before, 300 guests in evening wear, moving through the room with glasses of wine, and the open expressions of people who have paid to feel generous and are feeling it. I found my seat, table 11 near the back. I noted it. I said nothing. I set my clutch on the table. I ordered water from the passing tray. Marcus Webb arrived at 7:15 and found me without difficulty. He pulled out the chair beside mine and sat down. He straightened his jacket. He looked at the room. He said, "Good turnout." I said, "She's good at this part." He looked at me sideways. He said, "You doing okay?" I held his gaze for a moment. I said, "I will be." He nodded. He picked up his water. He looked toward the stage. He did not ask anything else. That is one of the things I have always valued about Marcus Webb. He understands when a question has already been answered by the way someone sits in a chair. The program began at 7:30. The Foundation's executive director spoke for 8 minutes. Brett Cole spoke for 6 minutes. He was warm and genuine in the way of a man who married well in all directions and knows it. Then my mother walked to the podium. She was wearing the navy dress she saves for the events that matter most to her. She had her notes in her left hand. However, she did not look at them once. She knew this speech the way you know something you have practiced until it becomes the shape of your belief. She spoke about Jenna. For minutes and 12 seconds I counted. She talked about Jenna's vision, Jenna's dedication, Jenna's gift for bringing people together around a common purpose. She talked about the children who had benefited from the Foundation's work. She talked about what it meant to raise a daughter who chose to give back. The room leaned in, 300 people giving a woman their complete attention. My mother is genuinely good at commanding a room. I have always known this. When she finished, the applause was long and sincere. She pressed her hands to her chest. She looked at Jenna, then she looked out at the audience. Her eyes found me in the 4th row. She smiled the efficient smile. She said, "And this is our other daughter, Sarah. She does accounting." She lifted one hand briefly in my direction and stepped back from the podium. The room had already moved on. I sat with my hands on my lap. In the 3rd row, Marcus Webb turned in his seat and looked at me. He held my gaze, then he turned back to face the front. He reached for his water glass, he set it down, he stood up. When Marcus Webb stands up in a room, the room changes. Not because he is loud, but because he is not. He is the kind of man whose stillness creates its own gravity. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and looked toward the podium. He said, "Excuse me." 2 words, spoken at a volume that was exactly loud enough to carry to the front of the room and stop the program coordinator mid-step. The room turned. 300 people found Marcus Webb standing at table 11. He said, "I apologize for the interruption." His voice was even, measured. The voice of a man who has spoken in courtrooms, boardrooms, and conference rooms for 30 years. He said, "My name is Marcus Webb. I am the managing partner of Webb, Harris, and Cole Forensic Accounting." He paused, letting the names settle. In a room full of business people, philanthropists, and civic leaders, the names settled the way significant things settle, with weight. He said, "I want to take a moment to make sure the room has the complete picture of the Whitfield family." He turned slightly, looked at me, and said, "Sarah Whitfield is a senior forensic accountant at my firm. She is the lead investigator on 4 of our highest complexity financial fraud cases this year. 3 of those cases resulted in full criminal referrals to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. In the last 2 years alone, Sarah has recovered or protected over $19 million in misappropriated assets for the clients of this firm." He paused again, letting the number sit in the room. He said, "She is not just an accountant." He picked up his water glass and said, "She is one of the finest forensic minds I have encountered in 30 years of this work. And I thought this room should know that." He sat down, raised his glass briefly in my direction, and then drank. The room was very quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that has a texture to it. The texture of 300 people recalibrating something simultaneously. My mother was still at the podium. She had not stepped away. Her hands were at her sides. Her face was the face of a woman watching something she did not order arrive at her table. Jenna sat at the head table with a smile that had stopped working somewhere around the word investigator. Brett Cole looked at the tablecloth. I sat in the 4th row. I did not look at my mother. I looked at Marcus. He was already reading the menu card that had been placed at each setting, like a man who has said what needed saying and has moved on, the way professionals do. The rest of the evening moved the way evenings move after something has shifted, the surface continuing, while underneath, everything is rearranging. The meal began. Conversations resumed. The silent auction generated bids. The program continued. 3 speakers followed my mother. She sat at the head table, beside Jenna, for the rest of the evening. She did not look at me again. Jenna smiled at the room when the room required it. But something had gone out behind her eyes, somewhere around the word 19 million. Brett Cole drank his wine steadily and said very little. My Aunt Georgia, my mother's younger sister, came to my table at 9:15. She was wearing a green dress and the expression of a woman who has wanted to say something for a long time and has finally been handed a reason. She bent down beside my chair. She said quietly, "Your grandmother would have stood up and done that herself if Marcus hadn't." She squeezed my shoulder once. She stood up. She walked back to her table. I looked down at my clutch on the table in front of me, at the clasp, at the outline of the yellow notebook inside it. I thought about Eleanor Whitfield pressing it into my hands. Write down everything that matters. Facts. The gala ended at 10:30. I found my mother in the lobby as the room was clearing. She was standing slightly apart from the crowd, her wrap over one arm, her evening bag in the other hand. She looked smaller than she had at the podium. People looked smaller once they came off the stage. I had noticed this before. She saw me coming. She held very still, the way people hold still when they are not sure which version of a conversation is about to begin. I stopped in front of her. I said, "Hi, Mom." She cleared her throat. She looked just past my left ear. She said, "Marcus Webb is a lovely man." "Yes, he is," I said. The silence stretched between us long enough that she shifted her wrap from one arm to the other. Long enough that she looked at me directly. Then she said, "I didn't know." She said it carefully. The way people say things they have decided are both true and insufficient at the same time. I looked at her. I said, "I know you didn't." Another pause. She pressed her lips together. She said, "I should have asked." The words came out quietly, sitting differently in the air than her usual sentences, like something she had been turning over for years and had finally decided was better outside of her than inside. I should have asked. I held it. I did not rush it. I did not say it's fine because it was not fine. And we both knew it was not fine, and the knowing was the first honest thing that had ever sat between us in a room. The other conversation happened 2 days later. My mother called on a Monday morning, not Sunday, Monday, which told me she had been thinking about it over the weekend and had decided she was ready. I was at my desk when the phone rang. I looked at the screen, and I let it ring twice. Then I answered. She said, "Sarah." I said, "Mom." She was quiet for a moment. I could hear the particular silence of her kitchen, the refrigerator's low hum, the clock on the wall she has had since 1994. She said, "I need to talk to you about some things." I said, "I know." She said, "The foundation." And then she paused. She said, "And the account." I set my pen down. I leaned back in my chair, and I said, "I'm listening." She told me not everything, but enough. The contractor payments. She had been processing invoices for work she described as administrative coordination. She was quiet about the specifics, the way people are quiet when they are confessing in a category rather than in detail. She said, "I thought it was reasonable. I thought it was." I said, "How much?" Another pause, and then she said the number. I had a higher number in my notebook. I said, "Mom." And then I opened the desk drawer. I took out the yellow spiral notebook, and I said, "I need you to listen to me carefully." I walked her through it, not with anger, not with the particular pleasure of someone proving a point, but with the even, documented clarity of a woman who has been building this case for 9 months and understands that the purpose of the case is not punishment, it is correction. She was quiet for a long time when I finished. I could hear the refrigerator, the clock, and then she said, "What do we need to do?" I looked at the notebook and I said, "The foundation needs a full audit. I can recommend an independent firm, not mine, conflict of interest, but someone I trust. The contractor invoices need to be reviewed and reclassified properly. And the money from my account needs to come back. With interest." She said, "Yes." One word, flat and certain, like a woman who has been waiting to be told what to do by someone she trusts and has finally been told. I said, "There's one more thing." She waited. I said, "I need you to come with me to Sunday dinner. Not to talk about any of this. Just to have dinner. Just the two of us." She said, "Why just us?" I said, "Because I want you to ask me about my work." The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. She said, "Okay." I said, "I'll make the chicken." She said, "Your grandmother's recipe?" I said, "Her exact recipe." She was quiet for one more moment. Then she said, "I'll be there." Like they always say, the people who take the most for granted are not always the ones who care the least. Sometimes they are simply the ones who stopped asking questions early enough that the asking became someone else's habit. The correction is always available, but it only starts when someone in the room decides to require it. That someone has always been me. I just finally did it in a room with 300 witnesses. The audit of the Ella Cole Foundation was completed the following spring. The independent firm I recommended was thorough and fair. The reclassification of the contractor invoices reduced my mother's compensation to zero, not punitively, but correctly. She had not been providing the level of service the invoices described. She agreed to this without being asked twice. I believe she was relieved. Some corrections feel like weight being removed. The money from my savings account, $7,200, was deposited back in full on a Tuesday in November. My mother added $400, interest she offered over the line. I let out a slow, heavy breath. "You didn't have to do that." Her response was immediate. "I wanted to." I held the phone a little tighter. "Thank you very much, Mom." The line went perfectly still before she spoke again. "Thank you for not going to the police." I met her silence with my own. "Thank you for not making me." She was quiet. When her voice finally returned, it was fragile. "Can I come for Thanksgiving?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes, of course." The relief on her end was palpable. "Should I bring anything?" I looked across the empty room. "Just yourself." She came. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had made pancakes with Lily, where I had opened the Form 990 on a July evening and found my mother's name where it should not have been. We talked for 3 hours. She asked me about my work. 2 specific questions. Both were genuine. Both required real answers that I gave her completely. She listened the way she listened to Jenna at the gala, attentively, with her whole face. Only this time, the face was turned toward me. I sat across from her and felt something old and complicated and essential shift in my chest. Not disappear. Shift. The way things shift when they have finally been put in their correct position. Marcus Webb called me the Monday after the gala. He was at his desk. I could hear the particular quiet of his office, the kind of quiet that offices get at 7 in the morning when the building is still emptying of the night. His voice came through the speaker, low and steady. "Sarah." I closed my eyes and replied, "Marcus." A heavy pause hung between us. He said, "You doing all right?" I held the phone and looked out my own window at the Nashville skyline, going gold in the early light. I said, "I am." He said, "That's good. I had no idea your family was going to be there. I want you to know I wasn't performing. I meant every word." I said, "I know you did. That's why it landed the way it did." He said, He thought about something for a moment. Then he said, "I've been meaning to talk to you about the partnership track." I said, "I'm all ears." He said, "You should be." I smiled. I set my coffee down. I picked up my pen. I opened the yellow spiral notebook to a fresh page, and I wrote down the facts. Lily came over on the Saturday after Thanksgiving. Jenna dropped her off, the way she always did, coffee in hand, phone in the other, out the door before the hello was fully spoken. But she stopped in the doorway this time. She turned around. She looked at me with an expression I had not seen her wear before. Stripped of the performance, just her face. She said, "I didn't know about the contractor thing. I want you to know that. Brett handles that side, or Mom did. I didn't look at it." I looked at her. I said, "I know, Jenna." She held still. She said, "And the account." I said, "I know." She looked at her coffee. She said, "I'm sorry, not for any specific thing, just, I'm sorry." I said, "I know." She looked up. Her eyes were the eyes of a woman who has been the golden one long enough to understand what that cost the people around her. That is not nothing, that is actually the beginning of something. She left. Lily came in. She looked around the apartment. She found the yellow spiral notebook on the counter. She touched the cover. She looked up at me. She said, "Are you going to tell me what's in it?" I said, "I'm going to show you how to start your own." She sat down at the counter. I got a fresh yellow notebook from the drawer. I put it in front of her. She opened it to the first page. She picked up a pen. She said, "What do I write?" I said, "Something that matters, a fact. The most important one you know right now." She thought about it for a long moment, her tongue pressed slightly against her upper lip, the way it does when she is thinking seriously. Then she wrote, "I did not read it. It was hers. I got the pancake batter. We made breakfast. We sat at the counter, and the morning came through the window, the way mornings do in a kitchen where the right people have finally sat down together, clean, quiet, going somewhere worth going. My name is Sarah Whitfield. I am 35 years old. I am the senior forensic accountant at Webb, Harris & Cole. I find things. I always have. The difference is, I no longer find them quietly and put them away for someone else's comfort. I find them, I document them, and I bring them into the room in front of exactly the right audience, at exactly the right moment. My grandmother, Eleanor, taught me the most important thing I have ever known. She pressed a yellow notebook into my 12-year-old hands and said, "Write down everything that matters, facts. Facts have a way of becoming the most important thing in the room at the exact moment you need them most." She was right. She was always right. She knew. She always knew. That is my story. One gala, one podium, one man who stood up in the third row and told 300 people what the fourth row already knew. If this reminded you that the facts of who you are do not require anyone's introduction to be true, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment. Tell me what moment hit you hardest. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.